They said her betrothal could save an entire county, but a secret codicil in a dead man's will would force her to destroy it all. According to sealed legal documents from the Finch family estate archives, this codicil exposed a truth so dangerous it threatened to upend one of England's most powerful dukedoms. But before we get to the explosive confrontation that shocked the ton, you need to understand the forbidden conversation that happened in the shadows of the Blackwood Library. It changed the course of history. The London season of 1851 was Lady Annabel Crestwood's coronation. At 21, she was celebrated not for brazen beauty, but for a serene and faultless grace that promised stability in a turbulent world. Her hair, the color of spun gold, was always impeccably styled. Her gowns, masterpieces of quiet elegance from the finest Mayfair modistes. She was fluent in 3 languages, possessed a formidable understanding of estate ledgers, and her posture was the envy of every debutante. She was, by all accounts, the season's perfect lady, and she was promised. Lord Alistair Finch, heir to the earldom of Westering, was her betrothed. He was a kind, earnest man with warm hazel eyes and a smile that reached them without fail. His family's estate in Hampshire, Hartley Park, was magnificent in its history, but as was quietly known, perilously close to financial ruin. According to Dr. Eleanor Vance, a historian specializing in Regency-era marital contracts, alliances of this nature were less about romance and more about mutual preservation. Annabel's substantial dowry wasn't just a gift, it was a bailout package. For Annabel, the match was a duty she accepted with poise. Alistair was a good man. Their life would be comfortable, respectable, and entirely predictable. It was a fate most women would envy. Yet in the silent hours of the night, a question haunted her. Was this all there was? A life of polite dinners and managed expectations? A placid sea with no tide? She confided this feeling to no one, not even her sharp-witted lady's maid Clara, who saw more than she ever let on. Have you ever felt trapped by expectation, knowing that the perfect life laid out for you feels like a beautiful, gilded cage? It was a feeling Annabel knew all too well. The first tremor in her well-ordered world came on a crisp May afternoon. Alistair arrived at her family's Grosvenor Square townhouse, his expression bright with an almost boyish excitement. He hadn't come alone. "Annabel, my dear," he said, taking her hand, "may I present my guardian, and the man to whom my family owes everything, His Grace, the Duke of Blackwood." And then she saw him. He stood in the archway of the drawing room, a figure seemingly carved from shadow and granite. Alaric Blackwood, the Duke of Ravenwood, was nothing like the polished aristocrats of London. He was tall, with hair as black as a raven's wing, and eyes the color of a stormy sea. A faint scar traced the line of his jaw, a relic of a past no one spoke of. He was known to be ruthless in business, reclusive by nature, and utterly uninterested in the frivolities of the ton. He radiated an aura of power that was not inherited, but forged. When his eyes met hers, the polite smile on Annabel's face faltered. It wasn't merely attraction. It was a sudden, jarring shock of recognition, as though a dormant part of her own soul had just been woken by a thunderclap. The air grew thick, charged with an energy that Alistair, in his cheerful innocence, seemed not to notice at all. "Your Grace," Annabel managed, her voice a little breathless. "Lady Annabel," Alaric's voice was a low baritone, a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. "Alistair has been eloquent in his descriptions. I see now he was practicing a fine English understatement. The compliment was conventional, but the intensity of his gaze was not. It was as if he could see past the perfect gown and the perfect smile, straight into the disquiet of her heart. This was the one man the Duke could not and should not court. Annabel later wrote in a private journal, now preserved in the Crestwood family archives, "In that moment, I understood the difference between a safe harbor and a perfect storm. I had been promised the harbor, but my soul inexplicably yearned for the storm. The real reason he shouldn't court her was far more than propriety. A letter from Alistair's late father to the Duke, dated June 5th, 1840, reveals the depth of the obligation. You know, Alaric, that I took you in when your own family's name was in ashes. My only request is that you guide my son, protect his interests, and see him settled in a match that will secure our family's future." Alaric wasn't just Alistair's friend. He was his sworn protector, bound by a debt of honor that was absolute. To desire Alistair's betrothed was not just a breach of etiquette, it was the deepest betrayal imaginable. And what she didn't know was that this meeting was the first step toward uncovering a secret that would force her to choose between Alistair's salvation and her own. Stay with me. The most shocking part is coming. The weeks that followed were a quiet, elegant torture. The Duke, citing his duties as Alistair's guardian, was a constant presence. He was there at the opera, his gaze a physical weight on her from the opposite box. He was there at garden parties, a dark, immovable figure she was drawn to against her will. He and Annabel rarely spoke more than a few polite sentences, but entire conversations passed between them in stolen glances. "You are playing with fire, my lady," Clara, her maid, murmured one evening while unpinning Annabel's hair. Clara was the daughter of a tenant farmer, pragmatic and fiercely loyal. "And he is the sort of man who burns down forests." "I have done nothing," Annabel insisted, though her heart hammered in her chest. "You look at him," Clara said simply, "and he looks back. In this world, that is more than enough to start a war." The breaking point arrived, as it so often does at a country house party. Alistair, eager to show Annabel his home, invited a select group to Hartley Park for a weekend in June. The estate was beautiful but worn, its grandeur faded. Annabel could see the leaking roofs and cracked plaster that her dowry was meant to fix. The weight of her obligation felt heavier here, more real. Historical records from the royal archives show that inheritance disputes and near bankruptcies among the aristocracy in the 1850s were at a decade high, with nearly 15% of titled estates facing significant financial distress. The Finch family was on the verge of becoming another statistic. Alaric was there, of course. Watching him stride across the lawns of Hartley Park, the estate he was honor-bound to help save, Annabel felt a fresh wave of despair. On the second night, a summer storm rolled in, trapping the guests indoors. The air was thick with the scent of rain and old stone. Unable to bear the polite chatter of the drawing room, Annabel slipped away to the library, seeking refuge. The room was vast and shadowed, lit only by a crackling fire. She didn't see him at first. He was standing by the tall windows, watching the lightning splinter across the Hampshire sky. "You should not be here alone," Alaric said without turning. "Neither should you," she retorted, her voice steadier than she felt. He finally faced her. "I cannot do this, Annabel." The use of her given name was a shocking intimacy. "I cannot stand by and watch you marry him." "You must," she whispered, her hands clenched at her sides. "You know what is at stake. Your honor, his future." "And what of your future?" he countered, taking a step closer. "A life of quiet desperation? A polite prison? I see it in your eyes. You are starving for something more." "What would you have me do?" she cried, her composure finally shattering. "Ruin him. Ruin you. The scandal." "To hell with the scandal," he said, his voice raw. "What good is a flawless reputation if it costs you your soul?" This is a moment so many of us have faced, a choice between doing what is right and what feels true. What would you do in this situation? Really think about it. The pressure is immense. It was then, as the storm raged outside and within, that she saw it. A small, leather-bound ledger on the corner of the desk, left open. It was Alistair's late father's private account book. A single entry from years ago caught her eye. Dated October 12, 1839. The entry read, "Loan to Blackwood Estate, $50,000 unsecured. Repayable not in coin, but in service. A debt of honor." But beneath it, in fainter, spidery script, was a note, a codicil. "Should my son, Alistair, face ruin," the debt is called, "Blackwood must cede the Northumbrian timber rights, valued at over $100,000 to the Finch estate. This codicil is void only upon Alistair's marriage to a bride with a dowry of no less than $80,000. Annabel's blood ran cold. Her marriage wasn't just a bailout. It was a shield, protecting Alaric from financial devastation. If she broke the engagement, she wouldn't just be jilting Alistair. She would be triggering a clause that would cripple the man she was beginning to love. The truth was more disturbing than anyone in society imagined. Alistair's father hadn't just secured a guardian for his son, he had set a trap Annabel was the key to. Pay attention to this detail. It becomes crucial later. "What is it?" Alaric asked, seeing the color drain from her face. Annabelle couldn't speak. She could only point to the ledger. He crossed the room, his eyes scanning the page. A muscle in his jaw tightened. He looked up at her, and in his eyes she saw not just love, but the agonizing weight of a trap snapping shut. So you see, she whispered, tears finally tracing paths down her cheeks. There is no choice. I must marry him. To save you. The days following the discovery in the library were a waking nightmare. Annabelle felt as if she were moving through a fog, the world muffled and distant. Alistair, oblivious, was more attentive than ever, speaking of their future with a gentle optimism that felt like a knife in her heart. He deserved a wife who looked at him with joy, not a woman who was a walking, breathing sacrifice. Alaric was a ghost. He remained at the house party, his face a mask of cold indifference, but Annabelle felt his torment as if it were her own. They were two magnets forced to repel each other, the strain of it threatening to shatter them both. Clara was the only one she could turn to. So you're to be a martyr then? The maid asked bluntly one evening, her hands deftly folding a silk shawl. It is my duty, Annabelle replied, the words tasting like ash. If I break the betrothal, I ruin Alistair and cripple the Duke. If I go through with it, I only ruin myself. And you think that's a small price? Clara countered, her dark eyes flashing. My lady, I've seen enough of this world to know one thing. Dignity isn't given. It's claimed. A life lived out of obligation is a slow death. Lord Alistair is a good man, yes, but he's not a fool. Would it be kinder to marry him, knowing your heart is a lie? Clara's words echoed the question that had been tormenting Annabelle. What was the greater betrayal, breaking a promise or living a lie for 50 years? The decision came to her not in a moment of passion, but in the quiet solitude of the estate's chapel. She sat in the cool, silent air, the scent of old wood and beeswax around her, and she prayed, not for guidance, but for courage. The courage to do the hardest thing she had ever imagined. That afternoon, she asked Alistair to walk with her by the lake. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the grass. Alistair, she began, her voice trembling slightly, there is something I must tell you, and I pray you will find it in your heart to forgive me. His smile faded. You sound so serious, Annabelle. Taking a deep breath, she told him everything. She didn't spare herself, confessing her feelings for Alaric, the impossible conflict, but she left out the codicil. She would not use Alaric's potential ruin as an excuse. This had to be about the truth of her own heart. Alistair listened, his face growing pale, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. He was a man of honor, not of high passion, and the force of her confession seemed to stun him. Vincent, he said, using Alaric's given name. The word was hollow, filled with disbelief. My friend, my guardian. Neither of us sought this, Annabelle said, tears blurring her vision. We fought it. But I cannot marry you, Alistair. It would be a lie, and you deserve more than a lie. You deserve a wife who gives you her whole heart. For a long moment, he said nothing. He stared out at the water, his shoulders slumped. Annabelle braced for anger, for accusations. But when he finally turned to her, his eyes were filled not with rage, but with a profound, shattering sadness. Did you ever care for me at all? He asked, his voice cracking. I do, she said earnestly. I respect you more than any man I know. You are kind and honorable, but what I feel for him, it is something else entirely. It is not something I can control. He nodded slowly, a grim understanding dawning on his face. Then I will release you from the engagement, he said, his voice flat. The scandal will be immense. I know. And what of the codicil? He asked quietly. Annabelle froze. You knew. My father's solicitor informed me of its existence upon my majority, Alistair said with a weary sigh. I had prayed it would never matter. I never wanted that kind of leverage over him. Alaric is the brother I never had. He looked at her then, a flicker of his old warmth in his eyes mixed with a new painful wisdom. Go to him, Annabelle. Don't let all this wreckage be for nothing. The scandal, when it broke, was even worse than she had imagined. The official notice in the Times cited mutual agreement, but society knew better. According to data from London Society journals of the period, a broken engagement 3 weeks before a high-profile wedding was almost unprecedented. The rumor mills churned with vicious speculation. Lady Annabel Crestwood, the season's perfect lady, was now its fallen woman. Her father was apoplectic, confining her to the house. Invitations ceased. Friends of the family crossed the street to avoid her. She was socially ruined, and Alaric was gone. He had left Hartley Park the morning after her confession to Alistair, leaving only a brief, formal note. Annabel was alone, adrift in the ruins of her life. She had chosen truth, and the price was desolation. A week passed in suffocating silence. Annabel began to believe she had made a catastrophic mistake. She had freed Alistair and Alaric, but she had damned herself. Perhaps this was her penance. Then late one evening, a carriage rattled to a stop outside the Grosvenor Square house. Clara burst into Annabel's room, her face flushed. "My lady, you must come. At once." Annabel descended the grand staircase to find her father in a standoff in the foyer. And there, standing before him, dressed in travel-stained clothes but radiating an indomitable will, was Alaric. "You have no right to be here," her father was snarling. "After the shame you have brought upon my daughter." "The only shame," Alaric cut in, his voice like cold steel, "is a society that punishes a woman for her honesty. I have come for my wife." His eyes found Annabel's on the stairs, and in that gaze she saw the end of her fear. "I have already spoken with the Finch family solicitors," Alaric announced, his voice ringing through the hall. "The codicil has been triggered. The Northumbrian timber rights will be transferred to Lord Alistair's estate, securing its future." Annabel gasped. "But Alaric, your fortune—" "It's timber and coin," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "It means nothing. You mean everything." He took a step toward the stairs, holding out his hand. "Annabel, I am asking you to build a new life with me, not in the shadow of scandal, but in the light of a truth we fought for. Will you marry me?" Her father sputtered in outrage, but Annabel didn't hear him. She ran down the remaining stairs and placed her hand in Alaric's. The world could whisper. Society could condemn. It didn't matter. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong. "1,000 times, yes." They were married by special license 2 days later, a quiet ceremony with only Clara and a trusted solicitor as witnesses. The ton was aghast. But as a duke, Alaric could afford to ignore them. He whisked Annabel away to his primary seat, Shadowfen Manor in Cornwall, a fortress of grey stone perched on cliffs above the sea. Their first years were not without challenges. The social isolation was real. A letter discovered in the manor's archives, time-stamped 3:47 p.m. on June 15, 1852, from Alaric to his solicitor, shows the extent of the financial blow. "The transfer is complete," it reads. "Our annual income will be reduced by nearly a third. We must implement efficiencies." But they faced it together. The quietest voices often carry the truths people fear most, and they had chosen to live by their truth. Instead of seeking society's approval, they poured their energy into the estate and its people. Alaric, guided by Annabel's sharp mind for figures and her compassionate heart, transformed his reputation from a ruthless tycoon to a leader in heritage stewardship. They focused on financial transparency with their tenants, establishing programs that promoted local craftsmanship and ensured a safe community. Annabel started a school for the estate children, focusing on youth literacy and education access. They didn't just rebuild a fortune, they built a legacy. What do you think will happen to Alistair? Drop your prediction below. The answer might surprise you. 2 years later, a letter arrived bearing the Finch family crest. It was from Alistair. He wrote that the timber rights had saved his estate, and more than that, Annabel's courage had freed him. Freed him from a match of convenience to find one of love. He was engaged to a local squire's daughter, a woman he adored, and he asked for their blessing. He and Alaric, he wrote, had a friendship to rebuild if the Duke was willing. In the aftermath, the two families forged a new kind of bond, one built on mutual respect and hard-won honesty. They worked together on regional initiatives, bolstering community trust and responsible governance. Alaric and Annabel established a scholarship fund for promising students from both estates, ensuring their philanthropic legacy would outlive them. Their focus became sustainable stewardship of the land and the wellness of the families who lived on it. One evening, watching the sunset paint the sea in hues of rose and gold from the windows of Shadowfen, Annabel leaned against her husband. Their young son slept peacefully in a nearby cradle. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "The scandal? The cost?" Alaric turned and kissed her, a slow, deep kiss filled with the peace of a hard-won shore. "Never," he murmured against her lips. "Honor isn't about keeping promises that will break you. It's about building a life you don't have to lie about." She had been the season's perfect lady, destined for a perfect, empty life. But by embracing an impossible love, she had found something far more valuable, a perfect truth. And in the end, that was the only legacy that truly mattered.